A credit officer opens the definition of a qualified borrower and changes one line. It takes about 30 seconds. It feels like an edit. It is not an edit. Here is what that 30-second change actually did. The old definition of a qualified borrower fed three other things: an underwriting procedure that screens applicants against it, the disclosure language the institution gives customers, and a sales playbook that tells the front line who to pursue. The moment the definition changed, all three were quietly out of sync. The underwriting procedure now screens against a rule that no longer exists. The disclosure may describe terms the institution no longer offers. No alarm, no ticket, no exploit. Just an edit that was actually a structural change, and nobody downstream was told. Quick recap, 30 seconds. A context graph is your institution's authoritative knowledge, definitions, procedures, and controls, connected so AI can use it and audit can trace it. Last episode, Discovery surfaced how the institution actually operates, but everything it produced was a candidate, not canon. So now we have candidate definitions and procedures. The question is, how do they safely become real, and how do they change over time? This episode is the second of 5 capabilities in Act 4, the develop stage. It's the spine of the whole build. Here's the principle. Your institution already knows how to manage change to things that matter. You just haven't applied it to meaning yet. You run a software development lifecycle, the SDLC. Nobody pushes code straight to production. It's written, tested, reviewed by someone other than the author, approved, released, and eventually retired. You run model risk management. A model goes through development, then independent validation, then ongoing monitoring, because supervisory guidance expects exactly that discipline. Context, your definitions and procedures deserve the same. Right now, for most institutions, that third lane is empty. Let's spell it. 6 stages. They'll feel familiar because they're borrowed from the disciplines you already run. Drafted. A definition or procedure is written down, often by AI, from the candidate's discovery produced. This is a proposal, nothing more. Tested. Run it against real cases. Does this definition of committed exposure actually reproduce the numbers the institution reports? Does this procedure handle the messy exceptions? Independently reviewed. Someone who did not write it examines it, not the author. This is effective challenge, the same idea behind independent model validation. Approved. An accountable owner signs off. A human. We'll come back to why that must be a human. Deployed. It becomes canon, the version every AI system and every person now draws from. And retired. When it's superseded, the old version is pulled from production deliberately, not left lying around. Hold that word, superseded. It comes back to bite us later. Now, who does what? This is where the discipline lives. AI does the heavy lifting on the front half. It drafts the definition. It runs the tests across hundreds of cases faster than any team could. That's the right use of the machine. But humans own the back half, independent review, and approval. A person who didn't write it challenges it. A person accountable for it signs it. This is effective challenge, preserved by design, not a policy someone wrote in a binder. It's built into the lifecycle itself. The AI cannot approve its own work because the approval stage belongs to a human. Take the human out of approval and you haven't sped things up. You've removed the effective challenge, and with it, the defensibility. The 6 stages matter. But there's one control inside this lifecycle that matters more than the rest: change propagation. Remember episode 3, the value of the graph is in the edges, the relationships. Well, the edges aren't just for reasoning, they tell you what's downstream of any change. Go back to our qualified borrower change. The edges show its blast radius, the underwriting procedure, the disclosure language, the sales playbook, and whatever else has quietly come to depend on it. In a pile of documents, that blast radius is invisible. You change the definition, and you simply hope someone remembers the 3 things that referenced it. In a governed graph, the blast radius is visible, and that's the whole point. Propagation is how a change to one node becomes a managed change to everything that depends on it. So the real question every institution has to answer is, when meaning changes, what happens to everything downstream? There are 3 honest answers, and you have to choose deliberately, because each one has a cost. Policy 1, auto-propagate. The change flows to every downstream consumer the moment it's approved. Fast, consistent. But it assumes the upstream change is always safe for every downstream context, and a definition that's right for underwriting may break a disclosure that's bound by different rules. Policy 2, queue for each downstream owner. The change lands in a review queue for every owner it touches. Each one accepts it into their context on their terms. Safer, respects local accountability, but slower. And if a queue is ignored, that consumer drifts out of sync. Policy 3, leave superseded versions in production. The old version keeps running alongside the new one. Sometimes that's deliberate. A contract signed under the old terms still governs that customer. But undisciplined, it's how 2 AI systems give 2 different answers because they're quietly on 2 different versions. None of these is wrong. What's wrong is choosing by accident. The policy has to be a decision, owned and written down, not whatever the tool happened to do. Let me make the stakes concrete, because this is the scenario that should keep a second-line risk officer up at night. An AI system makes a lending decision today, and the policy it relied on was rescinded last quarter. Nobody retired the old version. It was still sitting in production, so the system used it. The institution just made a real decision, affecting a real customer on a policy it had already withdrawn. That is not a hypothetical. In a world of documents and prompts, it's almost inevitable. And it is, in the plainest terms, a finding waiting to happen. Step back. In episode 7, we said the whole thesis is that context should compound, not fragment. This lifecycle is where that promise is either kept or broken. Managed propagation is the difference. When a change is reviewed and propagated cleanly, every downstream use case inherits the improvement. The correction you made once makes 10 systems better. That's compounding. Unmanaged, the same change leaves a trail of contradictions. Old versions here, new versions there, systems disagreeing without knowing why. That's not value adding up, it's reconciliation problems multiplying. Same graph, same change. The only variable is whether propagation was governed. Here's why this is worth the discipline. Bring back the card from episode 6, the questions an examiner or internal audit will ask about any AI-driven decision. Who approved this definition? The lifecycle has the answer. A named, accountable owner at the approval stage. What version was in production when the decision was made? Versioning answers it. What depends on this? The graph edges answer it, the same blast radius we used for propagation. And, when was it last reviewed? The lifecycle log answers it. Without this discipline, the honest answer to all four is, we don't know, and we don't know is the finding. So let's name the misconception this episode exists to kill. The misread is this. Updating a definition is just a quick edit. It feels true. It's one field, 30 seconds. But you've now seen what's underneath it. A definition change is a structural change. It has a blast radius. It needs to be drafted, tested, independently reviewed, approved, deployed, and eventually retired, and its propagation has to be a deliberate policy. A quick edit is exactly the belief that ends with a decision on a rescinded policy. Treat meaning like code. Where we are. We've built the develop stage, the spine of the control loop. Discovery feeds it candidates. The lifecycle turns them into governed, versioned canon. We kept saying version and supersede it and roll back. That's not an accident. Versioning is its own discipline, how you roll back and how you detect when two systems disagree because they're on different versions. We pick that up in episode 12, when we put 3 lines of defense around the whole graph. 1 line to carry out of this episode. A definition change is never just an edit. It's a change to meaning, and meaning, in a regulated institution, gets a life cycle. AI drafts and tests. Humans approve. Changes propagate on purpose. That's how a graph compounds instead of contradicting itself. Next episode, how the graph actually gets smarter over time. The learning loops. I'll see you there.